A woman finds herself at a crossroads as she realizes her family and close friends no longer feel familiar to her. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to focus on a short story that I came across, one that is probably one of the weaker ones, and I'm saying that at the outset. It's all about family life and friends and such. I am referring to The Burning House by Ann Beattie, which was published either 1979 or 1982. I can't find a specific date for it. For those who don't know, Ann Beattie is an American writer who has been writing since the 1970s, getting their work published since the 1970s. She's written a number of books, as well as a great deal of short stories, and she's kind of had mixed feedback on her work. Some people liken her to very psychological authors. Say her work is great because of that, but others have criticized her as being indulgent, narcissistic, and just focusing more on themselves than what they're writing about. I find that to be a bit interesting. I do see a little bit about that in what I'm talking about here today, a little bit of psychological, hyper-focused writing, but also some of that, self-indulgent, some of that overly personalized, putting yourself in there rather than focusing on a specific person. So I can see a little bit of both. And I'm surprised because I found this at random and I didn't know this author had such a sort of divided opinion base there. But without further ado, let's talk about The Burning House. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Burning House focuses on Amy. She is a mother and a wife, sort of living on the East Coast. With a very rich, it seems, kind of family. They make money. They can throw house parties and on a daily or possibly weekly basis, and so they seem to be doing pretty well for themselves. If they're not upper class, then they're probably upper middle class. Not much of a really of a difference or like a distinction really being noted there. And at the beginning of the book, we find out that they are throwing a party for some family members, but also some friends of the family. Amy is looking forward to it, but she's also kind of dreading it because she wants to rely on her brother-in-law, who is her husband's half-brother. He is what is described as a gay stoner, a man named Freddie Fox, who is very casual, goes to gay bars on a frequent basis, brings home a bunch of people, and in general, says what's on his mind, which gets him fired from some jobs and also causes a little bit of rift in the family at times. And we also see that her husband is ignoring her. There seems to be a little bit of a problem there that is more elaborated on as the story goes on. We learned that her son is at a sleepover, a boy named Mark. He is supposed to be out while they're throwing this party, but he has indicated that he might want to return during the night because he just doesn't want to be away from his mother or his father. And as the story goes on, we see that Amy is a little bit frustrated that he's kind of reverting to earlier habits like sucking his thumb. Doesn't really know what to make of it. And then again, as the party goes on, we see that one guest has arrived a bit late, a man named JD, who seems to be pretty close to Amy, and he says that he just got lost and couldn't find the place. and so they he's a little bit late, but they still welcome him into the party. And then a little bit later, she receives a phone call from a man named Johnny, who was in one of her classes because she's gone back to college. And JD introduced her and Johnny, and they seemed interested in one another and seemed to be having an affair, which makes Amy a little bit happy, and Johnny seems to be attracted to Amy mostly because she's unobtainable. She's in a marriage, but they seem to be getting something from one another. And as the party goes on, Amy begins to realize she no longer understands any of the people at this party, particularly Freddie and JD and other people at the party, especially her husband. That they were once familiar, but now they become completely different people, or she might have changed as well, and so she no longer really feels like she belongs in this sort of household. And as the story comes to a close, the party's still going on, but both Frank and her go to bed, which I think is interesting. And Frank says that men see themselves as superheroes, like Spider-Man, space travelers, and whatnot. Kind of these high opinions of themselves. But Frank tells her that he can no longer really relate to the situation because he's already viewing it from space, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a little bit worth talking about with the burning house. One of the themes that Anne Beattie is talking about here is the dysfunctional life, a life that you no longer seem to have control over, which seems to be Amy's problem here. Amy's home life seems to be chaos. Whether it's with her brother-in-law, JD, one of the other people that her husband associates with, she no longer recognizes these people, and she can't really get them to do what she wants them to do in order to make her life easier, because they have their own minds about things. And so she's having these parties with people she no longer recognizes, and she's having these family struggles, particularly with her husband, who again I think she's fallen out of love. Her husband seems to ignore her for the most part, which is probably going to make you fall out of love. He's more concerned about his business or his friends than he is about his wife. And there's even further struggles with her son. He seems to be reverting to earlier habits at a young age, sucking his thumb and whatnot, and Amy doesn't really know what to do in this type of situation. And ultimately, this dysfunction is relating to the title. The title is The Burning House. And we see that, literally, there's no house on fire in this story. So the title is more of a metaphor, of a figure of speech. Her home is burning, but it's burning in a way that she can't obviously see. She can't immediately fix. It's slowly burning because the people are changing, they're shifting, they're becoming, or they have different needs than they may have wanted earlier, so they no longer align, and that's creating some stressors in that relationship, and it's soon to crumble. After it burns down, it's going to disintegrate. It's not going to be there. It's going to go to ashes, and Amy will have to pick up the pieces. It's likely that there might be a divorce that takes place, or there will be some trouble with the friends that might make that difficult to sort of resolve. And so if what's going on continues to go at the pace and the direction that it's going, this doesn't spell good things for Amy or her family. And relating to this dysfunction is also the idea of the troubled marriage. Anne Beattie is touching upon that here. Amy's marriage is reaching a breaking point. She might have loved her husband Frank in the past, but now they're two different people, and their views, their desires don't seem to align. There's no real love there, and that's what you need for a successful marriage. If there's two people can be together and just live in high society, but if there's nothing behind that, it's just not going to be, it's not going to be successful. And to top all of that off, the sort of elephant in the room is the affair with Johnny. That's definitely showing that she's not happy with the marriage, that there's something beneath the surface that she might be getting from Johnny, but she's no longer getting from Frank. And I think that's attention, that's love, that's physical intimacy, because that doesn't seem to be happening here. So even though it's probably a doomed relationship with Johnny, because Johnny only seems interested in her because she's, again, she's unobtainable. She's in a marriage. It's still something that she wants now, because it's representative of how the marriage is crumbling. And I think both Freddie and JD recognize this. JD is the one who kind of set up Johnny and Amy. And then Freddie, he speaks his mind, and while he's stoned, he says to Frank, you have a great wife, child, house, you have a great life, but you take it all for granted. And that's obviously a problem. Frank doesn't really seem to respond to that. I think that's kind of something he realizes, or is starting to realize, but maybe it's not something he really cares enough to fight or to try to change. And so it's interesting that Freddie is pointing out this problem and nobody's really doing anything about it. There's more of a shame put on Freddie than there is on Frank. Like, how dare you point out this what's obviously happening, rather than how dare I allow that to happen in the first place. And I think the clearest indicator is what Frank says at the end of the story, with the quote he says, where he just says, there's. Men see themselves as Spider-Man. They see themselves above it all. They see themselves as Superman, like heroes. Like, they see themselves as larger than life characters. And then he pauses and he says, I'm already gone. I'm already above the planet, looking down at the entire situation. And the story just ends there. And it's kind of a devastating statement to make, because it's indicating that he can no longer sympathize or relate to Amy. That he's no longer trying to maintain this relationship, because he's viewing it from the outside. He's viewing it from above, or he has a bit of money and whatnot, maybe a bit of power, and so he's just viewing all these situations and friendships from afar, not really caring enough to intervene or do anything, because why should he need to? He has everything that he has taken care of right now. And there doesn't seem to be an indication that you need to fix any of these friendships or relationships. Not very introspective. And so it's kind of acknowledging the problem and being like, I don't really care. None of this is my problem, which is sort of a fascinating kind of admission to make. And you would think if you have that much self-awareness, you might want to do something. But I've seen many people in real life be this kind of way, who realize that there's an issue, or are viewing the situation from the outside, but those are the little people. Those are the people who don't really matter. So why would I do anything now? It's very troubling, and it just highlights why there's all these sort of problems in the marriage. Despite the interesting ending, I do think the story is kind of bare bones. It feels like Ann Beattie is doing what some other authors have done. It is like sort of gesturing at a troubled relationship, gesturing at this sort of skeletal outline of a story that she's written, and saying, see, fill in the blanks of what's going on. And it's an interesting story, but I do think others have sort of done what Ann Beattie is doing here a little bit better. Like, the most interesting aspect of the story is the ending, sort of the admission from Frank here. But the rest of the story, there isn't a lot to really hold your attention. It just feels like she's hashing out what other people have really written, other people have really said, and have written about in a much stronger way. So unfortunately, I feel like the story suffers because of the lack of attention, the lack of quality writing that Ann Beattie should have really focused on here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Burning House by Ann Beattie. it's a fine short story. It's not particularly special, not one of the best, and I do think kind of reaching there with one of the worst or that I've talked about here. Unfortunately, I try to make an effort to talk about good short stories, but every now and then I reach one where I've said I'm going to read this, and then I read it and it turns out not to be good, and it's just me talking bad about it for 10 to 15 minutes, which is not ideal. But it still has some promise. I'd be interested in reading more of Ann Beattie down the road, but I probably won't ever get to that because, again, it's we all live short lives, and why would you spend it reading an author who hasn't particularly wowed you the first time? If you have any thoughts on this or comments on my review here, let me know below in the comments. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author or this short story if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and troubled marriage travels. Farewell.